What you're about to hear isn't a story pulled from an outdated Cold War handbook or the plot of a paranoid sci-fi thriller. It's the real, unfolding reality of the 21st century nuclear landscape. A landscape where the boundaries of destruction are being pushed far beyond anything human beings have ever engineered before. Deep beneath the oceans and high above the cloud line, Russia is building machines that aren't just meant to win wars. They're built to erase the very possibility of victory. They are engineered not to conquer territory, but to make sure that if a global conflict erupts, there will be no survivors, no rivals, and no civilizations left to rebuild. These are Russia's two most ominous creations, Poseidon and Burevestnik, the Doomsday twins. For decades, nuclear deterrence rested on a strange, terrifying equilibrium. The doctrine known as mutually assured destruction relied on a single assumption. If one nuclear superpower launched a surprise attack, the other side would still be able to retaliate. That second strike, guaranteed even after suffering unimaginable destruction, was what kept both sides from pushing the button. The balance was delicate, horrifying, and paradoxically stabilizing. But Russia is no longer interested in a second strike capability that is merely possible. It wants one that is inevitable. Its new arsenal is designed to guarantee annihilation no matter what defenses its enemies build, no matter what technologies they develop, and no matter how many of Russia's missile silos, submarines, or command centers are destroyed in a first strike. Russia's new generation of superweapons is meant to deliver a final message long after the rest of the nuclear world has turned to ash. If Russia dies, the world dies with it. In the early 2000s, as the US expanded its missile defense systems and withdrew from the anti-ballistic missile treaty, Russian strategists became convinced that traditional nuclear deterrence was no longer enough. If America's defenses kept improving, Moscow feared a scenario where Russia could be hit hard enough that only a handful of Russian missiles remained, and those remaining few might all be intercepted. That scenario, even if only theoretical, was unacceptable to the Kremlin. Instead of matching the US with conventional upgrades, Russia decided to develop weapons that completely bypass missile defenses, weapons that can take routes no silo-based missile ever could, weapons that can strike from angles nobody can predict or defend against. The first of these machines is Burevestnik, the missile that seems engineered not only to kill, but to contaminate everything in its path. Its official name is 9M730 Burevestnik, but NATO calls it SSCX-9 Skyfall. Journalists and analysts have given it a more visceral name, the Flying Chernobyl. The idea behind Burevestnik is as radical as it is catastrophic. Instead of using conventional rocket fuel, the missile is powered by a nuclear reactor small enough to fit inside an air-launched cruise missile. This tiny reactor heats incoming air and blasts it out of the missile's engine at extreme temperatures, creating thrust without the need for fuel tanks. This gives it a theoretical range so enormous it might as well be infinite. In theory, it can fly for days, even weeks, circling the globe, ducking under radar, weaving around detection networks, and approaching targets from whatever angle is most vulnerable. This isn't science fiction. The United States tried something similar in the 1960s under Project Pluto, building a nuclear-powered cruise missile known as the SLAM, the Supersonic Low-Altitude Missile. Engineers got far enough to build and test the nuclear engine, but the program was eventually canceled. It was deemed too dangerous to ever fly, too radioactive to test safely, and too horrifying to unleash on the world. Even the Pentagon decided that a flying nuclear reactor, leaving a radioactive trail across the sky, was a step past the line. Russia crossed that line. Burevestnik's recent tests prove that Moscow is determined to make the unthinkable operational. According to Russian state media and statements delivered personally by President Vladimir Putin, a major flight test in October 2025 demonstrated the missile's ability to travel roughly 14,000 kilometers over the course of 15 hours, while executing unpredictable maneuvers specifically designed to outsmart missile defense systems. Putin described the test as historic, a milestone achievement that would cement Russia's position as a global military power. And in a calculated jab at NATO, he even claimed that a Western surveillance ship was monitoring the test, one that Russia chose not to interfere with. But the triumph Russia celebrates is built on a foundation of extreme risk. In 2019, a Burevestnik test accident at the Nyonoksa range caused a deadly explosion, leading to a radiation spike detectable far from the blast site. Several nuclear engineers were killed in the incident. It was a stark reminder that even in its testing phase, the flying Chernobyl poses enormous danger. The missile doesn't have to hit anything to cause a disaster. Merely operating it risks scattering radioactive particles across wide areas. Even if Burevestnik never carries a warhead, its engine alone leaves behind a deadly radioactive wake. But of course, Russia fully intends it to carry a warhead, possibly in the megaton range. The missile's slow speed makes it easier to detect than hypersonic weapons, but its ability to maneuver unpredictably, fly extremely low, and loiter near targets for days makes it a nightmare for any defensive system. It undermines the entire concept of early warning. It turns geography into an obsolete advantage. It represents a weapon that doesn't simply strike, it stalks. If Burevestnik is Russia's airborne apocalypse, Poseidon is its underwater one. Poseidon is not a torpedo in any traditional sense. It is an autonomous underwater vehicle, roughly the size of a school bus, equipped with its own nuclear reactor and designed to operate at depths far beyond the reach of conventional submarines. First revealed to the world, unintentionally, in 2015 during a televised meeting between Russian officials, Poseidon immediately terrified analysts with its implications. Unlike conventional nuclear torpedoes, which must be launched close to their targets, Poseidon can travel intercontinental distances completely autonomously. It can lurk in the deep ocean for months, perhaps even years, waiting silently for the command to strike. That strike would be unlike anything the world has ever seen. Instead of detonating above ground like a traditional nuclear weapon, Poseidon is designed to explode underwater, close to an enemy's coast. The result would be a massive artificial tsunami, a wave so destructive and so irradiated that it could obliterate major port cities, naval bases, and entire coastal regions in minutes. If the warhead is indeed salted with cobalt, as some analysts believe, the resulting contamination would render the region uninhabitable for decades or even centuries. This is not a weapon built to win wars. It is a weapon built to destroy societies. In late October 2025, Russia announced a major milestone: the successful activation of Poseidon's nuclear propulsion system after launch from a submarine. Putin boasted that its destructive capability significantly exceeds even Russia's largest intercontinental ballistic missile, the RS-28 Sarmat, already one of the most powerful nuclear delivery systems on Earth. He also emphasized that Poseidon is effectively unstoppable. No Western Navy has the technology to intercept an autonomous nuclear drone traveling thousands of meters below the surface. Poseidon is intended to be deployed aboard specialized submarines like the Belgorod and the newly built Khabarovsk. These submarines are effectively floating Doomsday platforms, capable of carrying multiple Poseidon drones at once. Russia has also begun building dedicated coastal infrastructure to service and deploy these submarines. Everything indicates that Poseidon is not an experimental weapon. It is being prepared for real deployment. Poseidon is the purest second strike weapon ever conceived. In a worst-case scenario, a nuclear decapitation strike that wipes out Russia's leadership, its command structure, and its strategic forces, Poseidon drones positioned across the ocean would silently receive their final commands and unleash their apocalyptic retaliation. The message is unmistakable. Even if Russia is erased, its enemies will drown in radioactive fire. The logic behind these weapons becomes clearer when you step back and view them in the context of Russia's deep strategic anxieties. For decades, the guiding principle of global nuclear stability was the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. Signed in 1972, it prevented both the United States and the Soviet Union from developing large-scale missile defense systems. The reasoning was straightforward and brutally rational. If neither side could prevent nuclear retaliation, neither side would be foolish enough to launch a first strike. But the moment the United States withdrew from the ABM Treaty in 2002, that fragile balance was shaken. Washington insisted the decision was aimed at rogue states like North Korea and Iran. Moscow did not believe it for a second. To Russian strategists, the ABM withdrawal signaled a deeply unsettling possibility. A future in which America's missile defenses could become so advanced that they might neutralize most of Russia's surviving nuclear arsenal after a U.S. first strike. Even a tiny chance of that scenario was unacceptable. In that moment, the Kremlin chose a radically different path. Instead of trying to match the United States missile for missile, Russia decided to render the entire American missile defense system irrelevant. And so it created weapons that don't follow ballistic arcs, weapons that evade radars by design, weapons that don't care how sophisticated American interceptors become, because they avoid the intercept envelope entirely. This is why Burevestnik and Poseidon exist. They are engineered answers to a decades-old paranoia, the fear that America could one day eliminate Russia's nuclear deterrent. These machines are Russia's way of saying, you can shoot down our missiles, but you cannot shoot down the ocean, you cannot shoot down the sky, and you cannot stop what you cannot predict. It's important to understand that neither Poseidon nor Burevestnik are meant to be used at the beginning of a war. They are too slow, too methodical. Their real purpose is psychological, to hover permanently in the background of every military calculation, every NATO strategy session, every American war game. They tell Western planners that even in the unthinkable event of a perfect first strike, even if Russia's silos, bombers, and submarines are all destroyed in the opening salvo, the retaliation will still come, from below the ocean floor, or from a missile that has been circling the planet for days. And that retaliation will not just devastate cities, it will poison entire coastlines. This brings up the question that haunts every discussion about these weapons. Are they real? Are they genuinely operational? Or are they high-tech mirages designed to intimidate the West and rally domestic support? On one hand, Russia has a long history of showcasing exotic military projects that never fully materialize, from stealth bombers to sci-fi-looking armored vehicles that never enter mass production. Both Poseidon and Burevestnik have suffered delays and failures. The Burevestnik reactor accident in 2019 highlighted the tremendous technical risks involved. The guidance systems for a missile that can fly for days at low altitude are extraordinarily complex. And building an underwater drone the size of a subway car that can navigate autonomously across oceans for months is one of the most difficult engineering challenges imaginable. Many Western experts believe that Russia is exaggerating how close these systems are to readiness. They argue that both weapons are so complicated, so dangerous, and so expensive that they might never become fully functional. They may exist more as symbols than as practical tools of warfare. Symbols meant to frighten Western electorates, to warn NATO, and to project power during a time when Russia's conventional military forces have been badly damaged. But on the other hand, there are very real reasons to believe that Russia's doomsday weapons are more than propaganda. The tests conducted in late 2025, including the reported long-range Burevestnik flight and Poseidon's first successful activation of its reactor while deployed from a submarine, suggest concrete progress. Russia is investing heavily in specialized submarines, underground coastal infrastructure, and nuclear research centers specifically tailored to these programs. Putin has publicly decorated their developers with state honors. These aren't the actions of a nation building weapons just for show. And even if only a few Poseidon drones or a handful of Burevestnik missiles become operational, they don't need to exist in large numbers to transform the global strategic landscape. That transformation is already happening. With each new announcement from Moscow, each carefully timed test, each display of underwater drones or nuclear propulsion mock-ups, Russia is making one thing clear. It wants the world to believe these weapons are real, and belief alone changes behavior. In nuclear strategy, perception is often as important as capability. If a Pentagon planner must consider the remote possibility of an unstoppable underwater nuclear drone that can wipe out the entire eastern seaboard, that possibility affects calculations. If a NATO general has to assume that a low-flying nuclear cruise missile with unlimited range could strike any command center from any direction, that assumption affects readiness, alert levels, and geopolitical risk. The shadow of Poseidon and Burevestnik stretches far beyond their launch bays. These weapons also raise profound ethical and environmental concerns. A missile like Burevestnik would scatter radioactive debris across every inch of its flight path. Even a routine test poses risks not seen since the early nuclear age. Poseidon carries the potential to irradiate entire ecosystems. A cobalt-salted warhead detonated underwater would create contamination zones far beyond the impact area, carried by ocean currents to coastlines thousands of miles away. These are weapons designed to kill the future itself, weapons that make no distinction between enemy and bystander, between soldier and child, between war and the environment that sustains all life. And yet, despite the horror they inspire, there is something coldly rational about them. They are perfectly aligned with Russia's worldview, a worldview shaped by encirclement, by perceived betrayal, by internal decline, and by a belief that only decisive, terrifying deterrence can prevent Western aggression. In this worldview, these doomsday systems aren't signs of desperation. They are signs of resolve, and they are meant to send a message so absolute, so final, that even imagining a war with Russia becomes unthinkable. The world now finds itself in a dangerous new chapter of the nuclear era. We are no longer dealing solely with the ballistic missiles and submarine-launched warheads of the Cold War. We are dealing with autonomous underwater superweapons, nuclear-powered cruise missiles, hypersonic gliders, and orbital weapons systems still shrouded in secrecy. The arms race is no longer a sprint for speed or accuracy. Or are they the cutting edge of a new and terrifying strategic reality? The answer may not matter, because in nuclear politics, the possibility of a weapon can be just as powerful as the weapon itself. Poseidon and Burevestnik now exist, whether fully functional, partially operational, or still evolving. They have entered the global conversation. They influence war games, diplomatic negotiations, military budgets, and national anxieties. They are symbols of a world drifting toward greater instability, toward more complex threats, and toward strategic environments where miscalculation could be fatal. In the end, the most chilling aspect of these weapons isn't just their destructive power. It's that they embody a philosophy of war where winning is irrelevant, where the only objective is to make sure everyone loses. That is the storm Russia has unleashed. And it is a storm the world may not be ready to face.